Good evening.
Right. Clock's not working. Good evening, councillors. It is 6 o'clock. Good evening, councillors, and good evening, members of the public. I am Councillor Dennis Spooner. I am the chairman of the Planning Committee, and I'm pleased to welcome you all to this meeting. Before we commence proceedings, may I take this opportunity to advise you that if the fire alarm does sound, please remain seated, and the Democratic Services team will assess the situation and give further instructions on the evacuation of the building if necessary. Tonight's proceedings will be webcast by the Council, but if anyone else is intending to record these proceedings, can you please let me know? I ask this question not to stop you, but merely to ensure that members and other members of the Council and of the public in the room know that this is taking place. I can see there are no indications anybody is recording. Thank you. I would also like to advise members that they should only address the meeting by way of the microphones and to remind them to turn the microphone off when they have finished speaking. Could I ask that you all please speak as close to your microphone as possible, because some councillors are slightly hard of hearing and it makes it very difficult for them to hear what you are saying. Item 1 on the agenda, apologies for absence. I've received apologies from Councillor Peter Holmes. Looking round, I can see there are no others. We have one substitute member this evening, Councillor Martin Round. Welcome, nice to have you on board.
Excuse me, Chair, I'm technically here for Councillor Holmes.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Round. There are some visiting members this evening, but I think it is just Councillor Parfitt Reid, who I think is joining us virtually. I'm not aware of any other.
I'm here.
Oh, good, thank you.
But I can't see any of you guys.
Okay, I think I can just about hear you. Thank you. Let's hope the acoustics improve by the time we get to your item. Right. Right, we now come to item 4. Items withdrawn from the agenda. There are no items withdrawn from the agenda this evening. And item 6, disclosures by members and officers. Are there any disclosures? No? Missed out number 5. Yeah. Item number 5. Oh, Councillor Mumford.
Yeah, item 12. I'm chairman of Borton and Chelsea Parish Council. Don't take part in the planning. I have a planning member, and therefore I intend to speak on it and vote.
Thank you, Councillor Mumford. That is duly noted. Item 5, urgent items. There are no urgent items that I'm aware of. Item 7, disclosures of lobbying. Have any members been lobbying on any item? If we put your hands up. Councillor Mumford.
Item 12.
Thank you, Councillor Mumford. Councillor English.
Items 12, 13, 15 and 16.
Thank you, Councillor English. Councillor Cox.
Apologies for being late, Mr. Chairman. My dinner was in the dog and I was trying to eat it as well. I've been lobbied on items 12 and 13. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Councillor Ashley Kimmins.
Yeah, 12 and 13.
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody else? Councillor Perry.
Items 15 and 16.
Councillor Brindle.
Item 13.
Councillor Young.
Item 13. Thank you.
And I've been lobbied on item 13.
Sorry, Chairman. Could Councillor Young repeat the item? I missed that.
Sorry, item 13. Thank you.
Sorry? Oh, I did. I thought I did. Right, item number 8, to consider whether any items should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. So far as I'm aware, there are no such items and we will take everything in public. Item number 9, minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of June and the 1st of July. I hope members have all had a chance to read these. Are you all happy with them? I think that is as a yes. Thank you very much. Item number 10, we have no presentations of petitions at all this evening. Now, deferred items. Mr. Bailey, would you like to update us on where we are with those, please?
Thank you, Chairman. I've got no update on the deferred items at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Before we move on to item 12, Mr. Bailey would like to give the committee a very, very brief update on some very recent changes to the National Planning Policy Framework insofar as they could possibly impinge upon some of the applications and decisions we may be making this evening. So I'll hand over to Mr. Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a very brief update to members. The government have been out on consultation to numerous changes to the Mppf, both Article 4s, both design changes that they wanted to boost in terms of biodiversity issues and making better use of trees in street scene. So they published the updated Mppf about 2 or 3 days ago now. And I'm just going to give a very brief synopsis of what it contains. In terms of one of the key measures, they've boosted and enhanced measures to improve design quality, including a new requirement for councils to produce local design codes or guides. And that's at the sort of the heart of their planning white paper in terms of the shift of planning to greater emphasis, and they are mandatoring it. They haven't gone as far in the Mppf at this stage, but they are talking about mandatoring or making design codes a requirement of local councils, but it's not in the Mppf at this stage. I won't go into the full details of that because there's quite a lot on design quality, but this has all come about as a result of the Beautiful Places, the CABE Commission, in effect, which came up with a whole host of recommendations to improve design quality, and that is now at the heart of the Mppf. And there's an emphasis of using new trees in development, so there's a new paragraph 131 in the Mppf, which states planning policies and decisions should ensure that new streets are tree-lined, that opportunities are taken to incorporate trees elsewhere in development, such as parks and community orchards, that appropriate measures are in place to secure long-term maintenance of newly planted trees, and that existing trees are retained wherever possible. There's a slight adjustment to the presumption in favour of sustainable development for plan makers, which is a slight rewording of paragraph 11A, which effectively states all plans should promote a sustainable pattern of development that seeks to meet the needs of the area, align growth and infrastructure, improve the environment, mitigate climate change, and that's by including making effective use of land in urban areas and adapt to its effects. There's also greater control over Article 4 directions. The reason why this has come into force is because it won't come as no surprise the government are ramping up the use of permitted development rights by what we term prior approvals, in effect where they've amalgamated a new class which covers lots of classes, say in the town centre. They've put that into a Class E, and they've brought out a new permitted change which allows you to go from that class to residential. So what they wanted to do is put the brakes on councils being able to control that. Doesn't say we can't do it, but you say effectively you must have an evidence base if you're going to remove these permitted rights in the future. So they've kind of put more controls in place if we want to restrict what the government say people are permitted to do. Regarding statues, they've said that council should retain and explain statues rather than remove them. So there's a new paragraph 198 in the Mppf, which seeks to address that point. And also there's a sort of faster planning system for encouraging faster delivery of further education, colleges, hospitals and prisons. And in effect, what they're looking at that is they're changing the time periods for determination, reducing it down to 10 weeks, and requiring local authorities to give quicker decisions for those critical pieces of infrastructure. So those are, in a nutshell, the changes to the Mppf that came about in a couple of days. So if members could just bear that in mind if there's anything, because that is now a material consideration in your consideration of any application tonight. As I said, that came before it was published on the reports, so the reports won't pick up on any of those little nuances, and I thought it just easier that I explain it at the start. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr Bailey, for a very succinct outline of the changes that have been made. Now, do any councillors have any comments or questions for Mr Bailey? Councillor Round and then Councillor Cox.
Thank you very much, Mr Bailey. I'm particularly interested to read the detail of that. I assume it's on gov.uk planning pages. Can you just inform me, or alternatively copy me the link? And I would suggest copy all members the link.
We can send members a link round to the Mppf, the updated one. Certainly can do that.
Thank you, Councillor Cox.
Thank you very much. I listened there with interest. There were three things that I highlighted as you went through. You talked about new trees and the street scene. As was pointed out by Councillor Harwood at the last meeting, quite often trees are not able to go in because of services. So did they enlighten everybody as how they're going to get, or are they going to designate that we should have ducting that only carries all the services, allowing therefore space for trees? That was one. Two, where these prior approvals or the prior notices of changing with Article 4, have they covered room sizes in that? Because something was passed very close to me on the 1st of April, and the new things came in on the 5th. Funny that, isn't it? And lastly, if they're going to reduce the period by which we have to determine things, does that mean they reduce the amount of consultation that is done with the public? And will we be able to carry out consultation in line with what we need?
Just a quick answer, Mr. Bailey.
Start on the bottom, because it's the earliest one. Consultation shouldn't change on that basis. They want to front load it, so they expect there should be more consultation up front before the submission of the application, and they're shortening the time period for determination, normally from 12, which is a major application, to 10 weeks. So they're putting the pressure on LPAs to determine quickly, and they expect greater front loading in the application. Regarding the prior approvals, what they have done is there is a mandatory requirement for any prior approval to meet the housing standards now in terms of internal room sizes and spaces, so that's mandatory now for any new application. And obviously our new local plan moving forward in Reg 18 moving forward is also proposing those housing standards to apply as well. And the last question, ducting. I think it's a very good point. I suppose the key issue is if members show on plans or say on plans they want tree-lined avenues, that is the planning permission that they have to build to. So the reality is if the developers don't get it right, then they're back to the drawing board, and I suppose we're back to enforcement matters. So, you know, it's now enshrined in the Mppf that this is what they expect. You know, there's going to be some challenging discussions, I think, moving forward with KCC, because, you know, we never know at the planning stage whether those roads are going to be adopted or not. And the problem that comes into effect is if they are adopted, KCC has certain stipulations. So there needs to be something that's worked around that, because we don't have control on the public highway. I'll park that one for a minute, because there is a discussion that needs to happen, because I personally think it's extremely important to enliven the street scene, yeah. But the reality is the planning permission controls what gets built. That is the document that developers have to adhere to. So if it says tree-lined avenues on the permission, that's what needs to be built.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Before I call upon Councillor English, can I just point out that Mr. Bailey's very, very brief presentation was just to explain briefly what might happen and what the implications were for the applications this evening. There will be other opportunities to debate the changes in greater detail, and they will of course also be covered in our training sessions which will be organised. Councillor. Councillor English, are you ready?
You've more or less anticipated me, Mr. Chairman. I think we do need to discuss these issues, particularly referring to the point about street trees. It's not putting them in, it's keeping them in that's the problem. Maintaining and ensuring they don't get ripped out after the immediate planning application period has expired. That's going to be the challenge, but now is not the time for a detailed discussion of these. What we do need a detailed discussion, and I hope the training programme will be amended to allow for that opportunity to take place.
Thank you, Councillor English. Right, we now move on to item number, what's my agenda? Item number 12, Robin's Rest, Park Lane, Borton, Monchelsea, and I'll call upon Mr. Bailey to present the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a part retrospective application for a change of use of the land to a mixed use for a single gypsy pitch, and for, it shouldn't say keeping of a horse, keeping of horses, I would suggest, with associated development including stationing of static mobile home, 2 tourers, utility block, shed hard-standing septic tank, and shelter. So just to take you through the application details, in front of you is the red line boundary. Just point out, I'll show you on the area photographs, existing G&T development, Gypsy and Traveller development to the north. This is the applicant, this is where the applicant used to live, lived there for about 17 years in the family. I will address this point in the presentation, but due to family issues, the applicant was required to move and this land became available. So they're still in close connection and tie. You've also got the sites of G&T development down to the south here, so just pointing out in the immediate context. So this is an aerial view of the site. So in terms of, you've got Park Lane and Back Lane running here. As you come down here, this is a public right-of-way. On your, if I can just draw your attention to the urgent update papers, there are some suggested some amendments to the conditions, and there is also comment from KCC Public's right-of-way, which have requested signage on the basis that on the public right-of-way, pedestrians have priority and cars should go no more than 5 miles an hour. So on that basis, you'll note there's some additional suggested conditions in order to secure signage to that effect. The site to the front part is not part of the application site. This is used as a wood yard in connection with Tiltswood, which is an ancient woodland off to the east of the site. So this is a working woodland, and this area is where wood and chippings are stored from the workings of the Tiltswood. So this is looking west into the site. So you've got the public right-of-way running where my red dot is, running this way. And this is looking into the access road taking down into the site. And you can just see at the end of it are the entrance gates into the proposed, or the retrospective application you've got before you. So as I say, public have rights across this road, but obviously not down this part of the site. And you can see that that is quite well screened from public vantage points around. So this is looking west from the public right-of-way. I'm just going to show where it's drawn. This is approximately this position here, looking across the woodyard area, so not looking at the application site, but it just gives you a kind of perspective that the actual application site is beyond here. These trees in the background are the hedgerows that line the field at the very back part of the site. So this is coming to the entrance to the site. So as I said, the entrance track, as you're seeing, goes off just up off the road here. There does appear to be a sort of a track that goes round the site, and that's subject that we need to sort of do some further investigation on, but that's not a consideration because that's not part of this application, and I'll sort of point that out as we go around the site. So this is the utility shed that's on site with caravan, and then this is the static home. It's not in the location that's shown on the plan, because the location of the plan shows an amenity area across this area here, and then the static caravan running around here. But notwithstanding that, what is actually on site is not necessarily what members are looking at. I'm showing you the photograph, but what we should be looking at is what's proposed as part of the application. If there's any changes to that, and we will be going back to the applicant to clarify the size of the site, etc., then if members were to grant permission tonight, they will be granting permission on what's on the papers, not what's actually you're seeing in the photographs tonight. And this is the road that I was talking around going back to the back of the site, because I'm not quite sure what this fencing is here. It's a much larger area than is shown on the plans I'm going to show you in a minute. And you can see the extent of the equestrian use, which is extending up to the back boundaries over here. So in terms of, this is not what you're authorising tonight, and this will be subject to further enforcement investigation to establish what is there and why it's there and what's going on the back here. So this is the plan that's submitted with the application. So as you can see, it's quite a contained area and doesn't look quite like that. So as I said, that's why I say just the photographs are just for familiarisation. It's not what you're necessarily looking at as part of this approval tonight, if you go that way. You can see the mobile home here. This is an amenity area, and in terms of these are the utility sheds and the caravan. So these are in the correct position, but it looks like to me that this area looks like it's been slightly extended. And that's the observation that I've made. But as I said, I'm just drawing members' attention because just so you don't think the photographs look a bit bigger than what's on the plan, this is what you'll actually be looking at, and if you are minded to approve tonight. Horse shelter in this area, and you can see where that fencing was. It seems to extend a much wider area around here. But notwithstanding that, you'll notice the amended condition 3 on your papers, your urgent update papers, which seek to sort of add some further clarity to that condition. And this is a standardised condition that we use on retrospective applications. And you'll notice it starts off within 6, the use hereby permitted shall cease, and all caravan structures, equipment and materials shall be removed within 3 months of the failure to meet the following requirements. And it lists a whole category of requirements that need to come in for further submission. This is details of the utility building that I've shown you on the photograph and of the horse shelter. Horse shelter hasn't been erected on site, is one of the things that is not on site. In terms of key issues to consider, I won't go through in detail. They are set out on your reports, page 6 and 7. I think what I was going to concentrate on is since October 2011, your report sets out that there have been 246 Gypsy and Traveller pitches delivered. which is above the established need figure set by the current GTAA, and that's the Gypsy Traveller Accommodation Assessment. That was produced in 2011, and that required 187 pitches over the planned period 2011 to 2031. So you'll see we're in 2021, and we've substantially exceeded our need figure. But the important thing for members to understand in this space is there is an acknowledged greater need for Gypsy and traveller provision, and that's where policy DM15 comes in terms of the local plan, in terms of the permissive policy. As I said, we are, and you will realise, we are going through a new GTAA to update that, but there's a lot of further work to do to inform the DPD document that it is intended to provide evidence for. But on that basis, we just need to sort of recognise that there is a growing need for G&T development, which DM15 is the appropriate policy to deal with that issue. The applicant's family are a known Gypsy and traveller family. As I've said to you, they did reside to the north of this site. The applicant has 3 children who all go to the local school, and officers consider that the applicant meets the G&T definition as set out in the PPTS, which is the Planning Policy Traveller for Show People. So that's the government's sort of document. Regarding visual impact, the site is well contained behind established screening. What I did forget to show you is down here, you can't see it particularly well, the applicant is proposing a 3-metre high bund to sort of divide the woodyard area from the G&T site. So that is on the plans. In visual landscape terms, the officer has assessed that, but we require just some further details, and hence that further detail is set out on H of your urgent update papers. Sorry, it's not H. It is I. Apologies, on your urgent update paper. That just requires details of the bund in that area. But again, what that further does is that further screens the site, and the landscaping proposals would seek to plant that bund up as well as part of condition submission. So in terms of visual impact, it is well contained behind an established screening, and whilst it is acknowledged that the site is located in a priority local landscape as set out in the Borton Monchelsea neighbourhood plan, it is not considered to result in unacceptable landscape harm, and in that regard it's applying the similar test to policy SP17 of the local plan, which deals with our it's a similar principle which deals with our LLV areas, areas of landscape of local value. The contained nature of the residential element of the proposal will need to be conditioned, and you can see that set out in your urgent update papers as well. Condition part 3 over the page. We've kind of isolated that, so there's some control over the expansion of the site, or at least the applicant would have to come back to us if they wish to expand the site. And the use of the land for grazing land is in line with established policy regarding equestrian uses on site. As I said earlier, KCC Public Rights of Way have requested signage to be erected, and a conditional condition is suggested in the urgent update, and that is set out on condition H of the amended condition 3. All other matters are considered acceptable or can be mitigated by condition, and the application is recommended for approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Before I go to our member of the public who wishes to speak, I've noticed we've now been joined by Councillor Harwood. Councillor Harwood, can I ask if you have any declarations to make?
I don't, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. In that case, we have one member of the public who I believe is speaking to us virtually. Councillor Smith from Borton Monchelsea Parish Council, are you there?
I am indeed, yes.
Thank you. Nice to hear from you, and you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Chairman and members. At Borton on Chelsea, we work with your planning department, landowners and developers in what we consider to be a practical, pragmatic and realistic manner, all working within the planning policy guidelines, obviously at national level, the Mppf, which we've just heard the update on, locally, your local plan, and our own recently made neighbourhood plan. We make no secret of our vision. It is to influence development to meet the demands of the modern community whilst protecting and enhancing a sustainable rural environment. And of course, all planning applications are required to respond in a balanced way to these policies in order to obtain consent. We wish to see this application refused for 3 simple reasons. This proposal represents further unacceptable over-intensification of these sites in the open countryside. Secondly, the proposal would harmfully consolidate sporadic and urbanising developments in the open countryside, causing unacceptable harm to the character and appearance of the area, contrary to the various Mppf policies and some of your own local policies referred to in the papers in front of you. And thirdly, as a parish and consistent with your own environmental ambitions, we ask that all applications you may be considering approving to include conditions covering A, provision of renewable energy sources, B, exclusive native species planting, C, provision of swift and bee bricks, bird boxes, and wildlife-friendly boundaries. And at a time when we've been, again, disturbingly reminded of the damaging effects of climate change and the biodiversity emergency, we are all beholden to make every effort we can to combat this. We cannot see that this proposal does, and therefore we wish to see it refused. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. We have no other public speakers, so I will go to our ward member, Councillor Mumford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. Yeah, I think the Parish Council are concerned of overdevelopment in this area. We've heard from the officers about the evidence that we do have, and the evidence that we do have is that we require to provide 187 pitches between 2011 and 2031. And so far, we have provided 246. And that's the evidence that we've got in front of us. There are other research going on, and they're suggesting that there is a greater need, however. So with what some people call as an over-delivery, what do parishes suffer? Well, within my parish, I have reports of Eastern Europeans living and renting mobile homes. I have reports, which are all being investigated, of, on social media, mobile homes in Borton and Chelsea. On these sites, I have 3 sites, being offered to rent on the open market. So while I possibly can agree that there is a greater demand there, maybe we're not monitoring it or enforcing it correctly, otherwise we wouldn't be having the problems that I see. And I want to bring this down from the general issue and finally end up with the site. The officer said that the footpath went in front of the access to the site. Yes, it does. It also goes down. And that footpath goes down to the Greensand Way on the Greensand Ridge. And we're allowing this ribbon development to gradually increase while we're asking our landscape department to apply for this area to be an area of outstanding natural beauty. Totally illogical. I'm pleased to see that this application has got EV in it, renewables and biodiversity has been addressed, and to the officers, thank you very much. I'd like to now go to the Gypsy status. And we're all very familiar. It says it excludes those who have ceased to travel permanently. These people have been in another pitch for 17 years. It does include those whose family dependence, educational needs, health, or other needs to cease travelling temporarily. Now, there's nothing in this report that shows me that they are intending to do that. It seems very, very permanent, having paid council tax for 17 years. So this family is homeless without this site, and there is no way that I want anyone ever to be homeless, so I'm not going down that path. The only candidate for that would be my wife. But with our over-delivery of sites, we can't go for a temporary site, I'm told. So I don't know where to take this. There is no indication to me that they fit the definition, which precisely says it excludes those that have ceased travelling permanently. And within the definition, those who cease to travel temporarily. So my interpretation of that would be probably they don't meet the Gypsy status, even though I have no doubt they are a Gypsy family, and I do not want to make them homeless. I would like to see this go through as a temporary.
Thank you, Councillor Mumford. Councillor English.
Yeah, I mean, there is always a problem with the Gypsy community at the end, say, of a family's life. If you've been a travelling family, for example, this is just one scenario that can emerge. If you've been a travelling family and you have a permanent consent because you're a travelling family, and then you reach, I don't know, the age of 70, 75, and you can't travel for business anymore, does that mean you then lose the right to your house? Because on a strict interpretation of what the policy says, that's just one scenario where someone would have a perfect right to live somewhere until they reach retirement age and stop working, and then they lose that right. So it's not as simple sometimes as it might seem, and that's one of the reasons why we're still waiting for a number of court cases, I think, in local authorities to actually test out where this definition actually leaves us, because as a definition, it frankly is about as useful as a chocolate teapot. I was going to use a rather stronger term, but in public I will refrain. So I think we've got to be a bit careful about hanging decisions on that definition, because it's not been tested yet, and I don't want this authority to be the first one to test it really at a very expensive legal cost. Having said that, in terms of all types of housing, whether or not you've provided to the total, whether it's settled housing in the local plan or Gypsy and traveller housing, just because you've reached the target provision doesn't mean that you turn down any particular planning application. Just with a settled community, if you get a planning application, you have to assess it on its merits. Now, first of all, we know that we've tested on a general policy issue, we've tested the over-intensification issue over and over and over again, us and other local authorities. It's quite clear that no government inspectors, well, very few government inspectors agree with the over-intensification argument, because it's extremely hard to demonstrate what that means in any particular context. So we're left with the site-specific issues. In terms of the site-specific issues, the officer's updated report deals with the third, well, largely deals with the third point raised, quite rightly, I think, by Borton Parish Council, in terms of landscaping and biodiversity, although Councillor Harwood may have additional comments on that. then we turn to the first two. Well, I'm really struggling to see with this site what the actual landscape impact would be in a negative sense of approving this application. And as we've been through before with this policy, you know, it's not enough to say there might be a negative effect. There has to be some sort of demonstrable impact, and or a situation where other policies are being breached, and I'm not really seeing either. So, in practical terms, I think, subject to perhaps some further discussion about the urgent update report and the conditions, that there isn't a reason to refuse this.
Thank you, Councillor English. Councillor, Mr. Bailey, do you want to come back?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just 2 points. One, the first point of Councillor Mumford's, paragraph 6.12 of the report, page 9, the officer does set out how the applicant meets the definition. If you go down to 4th line down, it starts, 1, 2, 3, yeah. He now travels to buy and sell cars, vans, mostly within the traveller community. This involves travelling all around the country and is often away for days at a time. So the definition means you have to live a nomadic lifestyle, so travel for work-related purposes. That is the definition in the PPTS. And on the back of that information that was supplied, it is considered that the app does travel a nomadic lifestyle for work-related purposes and therefore does meet, in the officer's view, the definition. With regard to Councillor English's, very interestingly, there was a recent High Court case which actually tested the legality of the definition, which was released last week, I think, or the last 2 weeks. And actually, the High Court upheld the government's stance on that basis to say it was perfectly legitimate to differentiate between someone who has ceased to travel permanently and someone who is actively leading a nomadic lifestyle. So, in effect, they've endorsed the government's PPTS, the planning policy for travelling show persons now, and that's... Yeah, it's been waiting quite a long time to come. We thought it was this policy came out in 2015. We've been waiting almost 6 years to someone to test it, and it has now been endorsed. The policy was, it stands by law that it was lawful to differentiate between those persons. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Anybody else? Councillor Heath.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I mean, just to comment on the definition, I mean, it's absolutely rubbish. That definition suggests that I'm actually a gypsy traveller, being away for several days in sales myself. My wife constantly complains that I'm never at home. I mean, that's not a point that we can actually refuse anything on. It's just quite comical. It was just I just wanted a bit of clarification. I know, Mr. Bailey, you mentioned that we're not considering that potential expanse of the site that, you know, with this application, that's not to do with it. It was just, is that something that is being looked at separately? Because I'm just not sat comfortable here knowing that there's actually a potential breach of policy and an application, and we're going to approve something where there's an investigation that we should be raising. I'd like to really put that that's dealt with before any decision's made, just in case it has an impact on what we're approving now.
The reasons why I've alerted you to it is because what you're approving is on the plans tonight. If you were minded to approve it, what's actually on the site is unlawful at the current time. So what we need to do is establish, if you were to approve it, then effectively when the decision is issued, that grants planning permission because it's retrospective already. So it's on that, so it's at the very time we issue the decision, it's automatically implemented on that basis, hence why we put this amended condition 3. So the applicant would have to comply with what has been approved. So if subsequently we go out on site and investigate that, and you find that actually it's a bigger site area that's been approved, enforcement will have to deal with that on the very basis, because it's not, you know, the breach at the moment is there is no planning permission. If you were to grant tonight, you would be granting what's on this plan, that they would have to stick to that, and they would have to stick to the conditions that came forward with that. If it was, you know, outside of that area, they'd either need to submit a new application, or there's potential enforcement investigations or potential enforcement action. I know that sounds a bit strange, but that's why, you know, I've kind of drawn that to your attention now, that it's not necessarily what's on site now, it's what's been approved as part of the planning permission. And that relates to what I said earlier about trees, tree-lined avenues. If you have that on a plan, and that shows as a tree-line avenue, that's what they have to build out, the developer has to build out. It's not what they may have on site, it's the planning permission and the plans that controls the consent. Hopefully that addresses that point.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Does that satisfy you, Councillor Reeves?
Yeah, it does. That makes perfect sense. It's just seems like we're setting them up to fail, is how I see it. Which is, if that's the way we're going to do it, that's fine. And I think the time frame for them to actually go about changing it to fit the application, you know, if we are going to approve it, the time frame might seem a little bit too harsh for them to just remove that amount of fencing and claw, you know, for us to claw back the land. But that's the policy, that's what we're going to do. So I'm fine with your explanation completely.
I think that's just the way the planning system works, Councillor Reeves. It's not as incisive as you perhaps like it to be. But I have Councillor Cox and then Councillor Perry. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Could I ask whether, I can't see a condition that I think I've seen before, where you mentioned that the gentleman travels around the country and is often away buying and selling cars. Are we going to be setting a condition that this isn't going to become a parking lot like something out near Leeds Castle? And it's no commercial, or are we restricting the number of vehicles, as I have seen before, where we say one lorry and a van and things like that?
Mr. Bailey.
Condition 6.
Condition 6.
Page 13.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, including storage of materials.
That would include
Is a car a material? Because if I'm selling vehicles and vans, that might be tow ropes and things that go with them. But I think we need to stipulate here that should actually say not just commercial activities, because I think we should be quite specific here, because we do that with no vehicles exceeding 7.5 tonnes, but not that we could have quite a lot of vehicles under that. I don't think it does safeguard us from that, or the locals or the area, because it does actually, where we're saying about furthermore, development will not cause unacceptable harm or character to the appearance of the countryside. Well, we have seen that, have we not, Mr. Bailey, where a lot of cars do cause harm to the countryside, so we need to be specific.
I can construct a condition to that effect that means that outside the residential area shown on the approved plan, no storage of any vehicles, paraphernalia, etc., shall take place on the land. So yes, we can add an additional condition to that effect.
I think we need an all-embracing.
I will leave that up to you with your paraphernalia, etc. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we need an all-embracing condition that could cover any eventuality virtually. But thank you, Mr. Bailey. Councillor Perry and then Councillor Harwood.
Yeah, I very much agree with Councillor Cox. I think you raised a very powerful point there. Just coming back to Para 612, this whole definition is daft, isn't it? I don't know whoever drafted it. I don't know, but someone drafted it who really wasn't thinking. Because when I read it, I thought, well, actually that applies to me. I travelled absolutely probably more than most blinking gypsies ever travelled. And I kept Welsh cobs and competed at horse fairs. So I assume I can claim gypsy status on that basis. Because, you know, this is absolutely rubbish. It's complete crap. Sorry, I had to use a word that I shouldn't. Hope that doesn't come over on YouTube. But I've just got a question, which I was just puzzled by, and Councillor Mppf sort of hinted at it, the family have been 17 years, they've been paying council tax, that's all very commendable. I have that. Then they suddenly have to move home, and then they've applied for social housing. Because obviously the homeless issue is incredibly important, I absolutely agree with that, but they've applied for social housing, but we don't seem to get what happened after that. They say they were desperate, but I mean, what were they refused, turned down, or what happened?
On the council-run G&T site. So what they would do is they would apply to see if there are any spaces available on the two council-owned sites, KCC-run. There are some places that do become available, but they're generally, their pitch turnover is quite limited, and obviously there's normally a need, as in pretty quickly when someone gets made homeless, they need to make their home. Land becomes available and they move on to the site. So this just sets out effectively what they've done to look for alternative accommodation as to why they've gone retrospectively on that basis. So it's what we normally see in quite a lot of occasions in terms of retrospective applications, that, you know, what has the family done? Is there any alternative accommodation that they can go to on that basis, and why have they gone to it retrospectively? So it kind of just sets out what's happened, but it doesn't go into the detail, I accept.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Councillor Perry.
Yeah, it doesn't quite answer my question, actually, because if you read the report, it then says they then applied for social housing. So, yeah, I get the point about the sites, and, you know, there wasn't anything available, but then they then applied for social housing, and I would like to understand, were they refused? What happened? Because it's quite an important point, because we're talking about homelessness, yeah, that's an issue.
I don't have that information to hand, Councillor Perry, as to what occurs with an application to social housing, because it's run by the housing team. Normally, they do inquire as to whether the pitch availability on the council-run sites, because obviously being a defined G&T, I'm not saying everyone, but their general preference is to live in a caravan as to carry on their nomadic life. So they would normally then go to the council's housing team to see, is there availability on the housing site? And, you know, that could be construed, I suppose, as social housing, because on that element, they're council-owned sites. Generally, pitch turnover, as I say, people stay on those sites for a long time. So that's what I suspect has occurred in this instance, but I can't say definitively what's actually happened, because I haven't got that detail with me.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Now, I did have Councillor Harwood and then Councillor English.
If you wouldn't mind letting me speak first.
Oh, yeah.
On
Are you happy with that, Councillor Harwood?
Yeah.
Yeah, please carry on.
I think we ought to be very careful about inquiring too deeply into the personal circumstances of individual people, provided we're satisfied they are of Gypsy status. Would we do that in other circumstances? No, we wouldn't. So I think we would need to be very careful about asking questions which, frankly, probably should be on yellow pages if we're going into that level of personal detail and information, and probably bears us open to accusations of not actually treating different categories of the community equally. The question is, are these people of Gypsy status? Is this planning application acceptable or isn't it? Not why didn't they get allocated a pitch on Maidstone Borough Council's own site? I mean, for goodness sake, how intrusive do we want to be? I'm going to move the recommendation for approval subject to the urgent update.
Thank you, Councillor English. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Round, do you wish to speak now, or?
Thank you, Chair. I think with the new conditions, I think we have no choice but to approve, and the conditions certainly satisfy those concerns that I would have.
Thank you, Councillor Round. Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I won't go into all of the other areas of the debate. I think we know this is a long-established family and the other things that go with it. I think the critical point here is about reducing harm on the landscape. This is one of, if not the most attractive landscapes left, really. I think in many ways the Greensand Ridge is more pristine and intact than the Kent Downs, which have an AONB status. And the reason for that is the march of arable farming, which takes no prisoners really in terms of landscape. And there's been a lot of mention here from Mr. Bailey about, if you like, the east-west landscape relationship of this proposal with its setting. To my mind, because we are on the scarp, on the top of the scarp slope, the key view and the key concern I have is the north-south. And what we've actually got here is just immediately to the south of Heath Road, we've now got a large block of arable essentially to the north of this application site. We now have two big arable fields immediately to the south, heading down towards the deer park, which is a remarkable landscape, which is like something of medieval times, and how it's survived, I don't really know. So, I think what we need to ensure here is that we use what is a relatively large plot to strengthen what is important about that landscape and stop, as essentially create a line in the sand with the arable encroachment, which is creating a much more open landscape as opposed to the more intimate sylvan landscape which typifies the Greensand Ridge. So I think actually we shouldn't look at this in a negative way, this application. We should look at it that it's an island surrounded on three sides by arable. Yes, it's got a woodyard on one side going onto a woodland, but actually it's got arable the rest of the way around. So because there is the very large area which is going to be contained within the horse paddock, there is a real opportunity for a really strong landscape treatment to link the existing hedge lines that we've got to the woodyard and to the woodland and then down towards the deer park. And what I'm very keen we do is we have a very detailed landscaping scheme with this, which sets out with no avoidance of doubt where we need either natural regeneration. It could just be fenced off and it will naturally regenerate if need be, have a few trees and hedges put in and so on, but actually do it in a kind of master planning way. So you're actually looking at the scarp and looking at where additional planting should go, because I don't think there are any issues. When you're in kind of back lane and round by Weirton that way, you know, you can't see the site from nearby. Where it will be an issue is in the longer views from the south. So I think with all of the conditions that were attached as per the papers that was moved by Councillor English and seconded by Councillor Round, I think we should perhaps delegated powers to the officers to look in some detail at where that detailed landscaping scheme is going to need to go, because it is quite important, because for example, once you've got horses in those paddocks, they will kind of eat any landscaping. So therefore it makes a real difference as to what the final position is of those fences, what the final position is of that access track that we've already seen is going to be part of a subsequent application. And we need to get this right. So can I kind of ask the mover and seconder to take on board that almost landscape analysis to fit this site into the landscape? And I think it's good for the applicants as well, because it means they're part of restoring this important area of landscape, and it actually helps them in terms of any kind of future changes to the paddock layout and so on, if they've got that strong landscape spine containing it. Thank you.
I'm quite happy to agree with that. I think that's an actual improvement in the area.
Councillor Mumford.
Yeah, that was where I was coming from. You know, we're concerned about the overdevelopment of what is a sensitive site, and I think Councillor Harwood explained its sensitivities very well. But we're looking at something where we don't have a scheme. They're asking for, within 6 weeks, a scheme to be delivered, and normally we're looking at some form of scheme. So I'm asking, and we refer things to the committee so the committee can decide that that scheme, point A, should be detailed boundary treatment and the landscape master plan. And for that, D and G, which are very important aspects both to the parish council, myself, and hopefully this committee for that sensitive location, can that come back to Councillor Harwood, myself and the parish council if you are happy with that, Clive, etc.?
That sounds very sensible to me. We owe it to both the applicant and the local area to get it right.
Chairman, very quickly,
Yep.
can we take the somewhat radical step that when we're talking about the landscaping, to actually state that the landscaping does not necessarily mean to include just plants, so accommodates natural regeneration? Because if you fence an area off and it's not grazed, it will soon turn into the type of trees and shrubs that are meant to grow there. So perhaps, you know, we're not putting a huge expense onto the applicant, but we are ensuring there is the non-grazed land which will naturally soften up of its own accord. And I think Mr. Bailey will probably get that, because I know he's been in a few discussions where this very topic has been debated. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. That sounds very, very sensible. So we have a recommendation. It has been seconded. The motion was to approve the recommendation on the papers as amended by the urgent update, and with a condition to an all-embracing condition to prevent any commercial uses, and also to substantially beef up the landscaping and tree planting condition, which would come back to this committee for approval with consultation with the local members. Is that my understanding? Is that correct, Mr. Bailey?
Yeah, I didn't think it was coming back to this committee. My thought process was in consultation with Councillor Mumford. There were 3 members.
It was Councillor Mumford, Councillor Harwood and the parish.
Yep. Yes, I think that is correct.
And the parish council.
Yep. Okay, on that basis, can I please have a show of hands, those in favour of granting the approval as recommended? Well, that is carried. Thank you, members. Oh, sorry. Votes against? Well, it was unanimous, though. Wasn't it?
Can I have a vote, please?
Oh, sorry, I didn't notice
Can
you
I
there. Sorry.
abstain?
Sorry?
Can I abstain, Mr.
Abstain,
Chairman?
okay, sorry, Councillor Mumford.
Thank you.
I didn't notice you. I'm so sorry. Thank you, members. Right. We now progress to item 13 on the agenda, Amsbury Road, Cox Heath, Maidstone. And I'll ask Mr. Bailey to present the report, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I just get the presentation ready. So this is an application for erection of a 4-bedroom chalet-style bungalow with integral garage and associated parking. It's a resubmission of a previously withdrawn application. Members will note this application came before committee on the 22nd of April 2021, and it was resolved by committee to defer this item on 3 items as set out on page 17 of your papers, to seek comments from Kent Fire and Rescue Service about safety and access to the dwelling by a fire engine, seeking confirmation as to whether the site is located in Cox Heath, larger village settlement boundary, and thirdly, additional conditions to secure biodiversity. In terms of question 1, if I can just draw your attention to the urgent update papers, the officer had originally suggested a sprinkler system by informative. I didn't think that that was appropriate in this instance on the basis, whilst we don't merge legislation, and by that I mean building control deals with its own legislation, planning deals with its own legislation, and the two don't mix, it is very relevant if there is a fire safety issue to deal with that under the planning legislation and to also deal with it under the building control legislation. So on that basis, and I've done it numerous occasions where fire engines can't get within the specified distance, that as long as it meets the 6 test, is it reasonable, necessary, relevant, etc., then it is acceptable to impose that condition. So I have requested on the papers that a sprinkler system condition is added to this consent if members were minded to grant, and that would say, in effect, prior to occupation, a sprinkler system shall be installed. So that's one of the issues, and you know, whilst that may be dealt with under the building control, under the Building Acts as well as set out on your papers, it's still very relevant in terms of the planning consideration tonight. The second part relates to is it within the settlement boundary? You can see on page 19 that it does include this site within the settlement boundary, and the third part, biodiversity enhancements, are included in condition 9 and condition 11 and condition 6 landscaping scheme. Just to go through the application details, this is the application site here. This is the dwelling that's proposed on the site. If I could just also draw members' attention, what is material to your consideration is the appendix. Doesn't quite say it, but page 24 of your papers, that is the report that came to members. So the matters contained in that report are also still relevant to your consideration. This is a very similar, if not the same, dwelling type that was approved in January 2017. So whilst it wasn't approved under the auspices of the current local plan, it was approved under the auspices of the previous local plan, which didn't change countryside policies that significantly, and notwithstanding that, as I said, this isn't in the countryside, so it's not an SP17, it is within the larger village settlement where the presumption of development applies. In terms of looking at the site, one of the key issues that has availed it is access leading into the site. This is the area of the garden. As I said, you previously note that this committee did approve in January 2017 a very similar scheme to what's currently being proposed. So if members were to reach a different conclusion, you'd almost have to consider why was it acceptable in 2017 as to not be acceptable now on that basis. This is the garden area where the dwelling's proposed. This is the access down the site, which obviously access for the new dwelling will have to come. And this is a view facing east across the application site. And just a view again across the application site with the side garden of the existing property. So hopefully that addresses members' previous comments on the application. The application is recommended for approval, subject to those conditions set out on page 19 to 23 of your papers. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Before I go to our public speaker, we've now been joined by Councillor Forecast. Can I ask you, please, Councillor Forecast, if you have any declarations to make? Thank you, Councillor Forecast. Thank you. Right, we now have a public speaker, Mr. Gordon, who is the applicant. If you'd like to come forward and take a seat by the microphone, and you press the button in the middle, and the microphone will light up red, and you have 3 minutes.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The actual development, as been already mentioned, it has already been granted. Since then, there's been no substantive changes in building policy or the environment. What the situation was then is the situation that it is now. The only thing that's changed is the passage of time. So I can't really understand why planning shouldn't be granted. There has been objections about the possibility that badger sets and veteran trees exist on the site. Again, these were raised before, and the same situation applies. There are none. We've had experts coming to confirm this, and officers of the Planning Committee have visited themselves and confirmed that these aren't present. Latest questions about fire safety. Again, nothing has changed. The development is not an isolated property in the middle of nowhere. It's at the end of a lane that currently services two other properties since the 1960s. A fire appliance can get down that lane. The lane is a metre wider than the width of a fire appliance. And I'm sure that building regulations may have changed since the 60s, but I'm sure that if a fire did actually come about in one of the existing properties, the fireman wouldn't sit at the end of the lane with their arms crossed and let the place burn and let lives be lost, simply because some arbitrary building conditions that state that they shouldn't go down there. They would access it physically, practically. They would deal with the fire, and they could therefore deal with the fire at this new development. The only reason that there's a slight issue with the building regulations is the turning circle at the end of the lane. In the building regulations, it says it has to be at least 19.4 metres wide. It's actually 20 metres wide. I'll agree, it wouldn't be easy. It would be frustrating to go backwards and forwards. And I've taken a building van down that lane, and I found it easier simply to reverse back. It's a straight lane, 54 metres long. So from a physical point of view and a realistic point of view and a real-life point of view, fire appliances can get down that lane. However, to comply with requirements, if we did have a sprinkler system installed, which I will definitely make sure is installed, then the fire appliance doesn't have to get so close, and it would be compliant. So in actual fact, when this development is built, it will probably be the safest property in Heath from a fire safety perspective. I mean, if there was a small fire started, it would be extinguished before the appliance even left the fire station. I mean, it really is a very good idea, and certainly if nothing else, it's opened my eyes to how good these things are, and we'll be using them in the future. So I feel very happy that this development is a sound one, and really it seems to be one that should be wholeheartedly embraced. It will add obviously to the housing stock in the area, but it won't be seen at all from the Amsbury Road. It will be at the end of people's back gardens, which at the moment have heavy overgrowth, and they won't very unlikely to be able to see it. Nobody will notice it apart from the people, I myself, who live in number 15. That would be the next door neighbour. If you wanted to go looking for it, you could probably find it, but outside of that, it wouldn't be there. And it would look very natural in appearance. It would share a very large garden, so both properties will end up with a large garden. And it would just look natural.
Thank you. We have one visiting member, Councillor Parfitt-Reid, who should be with us virtually. Are you with us, Councillor Parfitt-Reid?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'm here.
Right. You have your 3 minutes starting from now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to try and keep this as brief as possible. I've been asked to represent all the neighbours for the adjoining properties for this development, all of which object to this planning application. Quite why it was passed in 2017, I'm not sure, because it is an overdevelopment of a space. This particular part of the village, it's not really in the urban part of Heath. It is very much on the countryside. You know, you've got the orchards at the back, and I just think that this is too much in that small space. You know, this is a 4-bedroom, 4-bathroom property, basically in somebody's garden. It will overshadow the neighbours. I've been there. I don't know whether any other members have actually been down there, but that lane is exceptionally narrow. So there will be a loss of privacy for one of the neighbours, certainly, and it is very, very close to her boundary. Going on to the fire aspect of it, my concerns are, now I've just been appointed to Kent Fire and Rescue Authority, and I have been at Rochester Fire Station today, and let me tell you, a meter is not sufficient. Everything on a fire engine is in the side of the engine, so an engine could not go down there and operate. And what I think we need to consider here is that a sprinkler system only operates well if it can be operated at less than 90 metres from the engine. And obviously, if it can't go down the lane, it's going to have to do it from Amsbury Road. And if it does it from Amsbury Road, there is more than 90 metres to cover, and therefore the sprinkler system could be ineffective. Now, I think what we've got to ask ourselves here is, if there is no fire, as a planning authority, we are never going to be called into question as to whether it was a good or sound decision. However, if there was a fire and there was a fatality, can we honestly say that we have done everything we can to ensure that that property and any people that reside in it have been protected? And I'm not convinced that we can. So that's all I'm going to say. Thank you very much. And that's what I would like the committee to consider, is to debate this on the grounds of safety, because an engine could not go down that road. Despite what the applicant says, an engine might get down there, but it wouldn't be functional. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Parfitt-Reid. Now I have Councillor English and Councillor Eves.
Well, I'm sure that Councillor Parfitt-Reid knows the area fairly well and feels passionately about it. Nevertheless, an extant planning permission, whether one thinks it should have been approved or not, is a material consideration. And whether one feels it should be or isn't part, an area that feels like it should be part of the urban area, it is within the settlement boundary. That may be an error, but that is, in both cases, but those are facts. I would debate some of what she said about the technical issues in relation to the fire safety points. I don't think they're actually correct, but leaving that aside, this is a planning committee. It makes decisions on planning issues. Provided we have followed the correct procedure, taken the planning material considerations into account, and have not made a rash decision to disregard any of those relevant planning considerations, then this committee, whatever decision it makes, has made the right decision defensible before any organisation or inquiry. Fine, we cannot, because we think we know better than legislation, decide to substitute our own personal opinions on non-planning matters and therefore take a planning decision based on those. We need a planning reason if we are to refuse this application. We do not have one. Now, we might not like that. I don't particularly like that in many cases when we're faced with that situation, but I don't see a planning ground for refusal here. What I do see is an application that's been improved materially by the deferral and has actually got an extra safety precaution put in that wasn't there before, which suggests that the committee were right to defer it in the first place because we have got a better outcome. But beyond that, I don't see any additional things that we should do unless there's a condition I've overlooked somewhere, which is always possible. But we do not have grounds for refusal, and I think if we did refuse it, we'd just lose the additional safety mechanism that we've managed to secure.
Thank you, Councillor English. Are you prepared to move as per the papers?
Might not be a popular thing to do, but I'll move it with the, as on the papers, yes.
Okay.
Can I just check whether there's an urgent update? Because having been on holiday, I might have missed it.
There is an urgent update on the provision of a sprinkler system.
Oh, that's good. I don't seem to, thank you. Thank you very much. I didn't have that piece of paper. So I'm moving it on the papers with the urgent update.
Okay, rather than go straight to Councillor, can I ask you if you want to second the motion? You want to say? Do you want to speak now, or? Yeah, please do.
Yeah, I will do very quickly. Yeah, and thank you very much, Chairman. Councillor English took most of my words out of my mouth, so so it will be very brief from me. But the fact is that I think the reason why we do need to approve it is, as Councillor English said, we have that additional safety feature in place. We are not the experts in terms of things outside of planning, but also we can't actually test the effectiveness of a sprinkler system until it goes to a building regulations application, at which point, if there is an issue that's found, everything stops and a resolution will then need to be sought. So until we get to that point, we will never know. So there is no risk to us as a committee in terms of any liability, because we are following purely the planning application in front of us and not what the building reg application will deal with.
Thank you, Councillor Eves. Was there anybody else? Councillor Cox.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Can I just get this right before we vote on this? Before the sprinkler system was proposed, it wasn't right because it was more than 45 metres away from the road. Now it's got to have a sprinkler system. It can be up to 90 metres. It's nothing to do with how far away the tender is from the road, because it doesn't operate the sprinkler system. The sprinkler system is built into the house. They don't rush up, connect a hose and go, oh, it's working. It is completely separate. It is there to enable the fire engine or tender to get there at a reasonable speed because it knows the fire is already being fought. I just wanted to clarify that for anybody who's watching and thinking that we should have taken into consideration what has been put before us, which I'm afraid we shouldn't. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Is there anybody else? So we have a motion to approve the application as per the papers, together with the urgent update requiring the condition for the installation of a sprinkler system. So can I please have votes in favour? Thank you, Mrs. Snook. So there's no votes against, no abstentions, so I've got it right this time. So that is carried and permission is now granted. Thank you very much, members. Right, we now come to item 15 on the agenda, which is Dickens Gate, Marden Road, Staplehurst. Some of you may have noticed that on an earlier paper this was done as a starred item. That is no longer the case. We have a member of the public who wishes to speak, and I've agreed to allow them to let them speak. So I will ask Mr. Timms, please, if he could please introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. I wasn't going to present this one because there's no plans, obviously, and I hope the report's fairly self-explanatory. And it's just to say, in terms of updates, we've had one further representation in support of the proposals. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Timms. I think that must be the quickest presentation we've ever had. Right. Right, turning now to our public. our public speakers, we have Councillor Sharp from Staplehurst Parish Council, who is with us in person, or should be. Ah, right, there you are. Sorry, you were hiding behind somebody. If you press the button in front of you, your speaker will turn red, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Speaking for Staplehurst Parish Council, our concerns remain about the harm to the existing and new residents that could be caused or are being caused by the sewage problem, and that H148 of the local plan requires the sewage connection to be of adequate capacity, so the pumping station is not overwhelmed. We were under the impression that Southern Water was meant to report back on the previous possible solutions with reasons about why they had been abandoned. It seems that isn't going to happen. At this point, as the developers have been allowed to complete their build, ignoring everything that we've suggested so far, it seems that our protests have now become the perceived problem for the residents. To that end, we point out that bowing to the superior professional expertise of Southern Water, that their solution is an adequate and therefore permanent solution to fix the sewage disposal issue. Therefore, they will, I assume, have no problem assuring us and the residents that for the protection of the residents, that they provide a bespoke 24-hour, 365-day contact for residents should anything go wrong. Hopefully, this will never be used. And therefore, it won't provide us with the unhappy situation of saying, we told you so, if you get my drift. This would hopefully mean that we don't have the situation that we've had so far with our local councillors spending many hours on phones trying to get some sort of help and assistance with residents having sewage coming up through their houses. One time our chair had to spend a lot of his 23rd of December trying to sort this all out. Anyway, as I said, we will bow to the superior professional expertise and hope that they are right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We now have, for the applicant, Miss Dunn, who is going to speak to us virtually. Are you with us? Hello?
Hi, yeah. Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes, you have 3 minutes from when you start.
Lovely, thank you. So, good evening, Chair. Good evening, members. I am here this evening to ask members to support their offer's recommendation and approve the details that have been submitted to discharge this planning condition. As members are aware, this condition has already been approved twice before and currently allows for the occupation of 192 of the 250 new homes planned. This third application now seeks approval for the remaining 58. Our foul drainage strategy has always been to connect into the public sewer. We have a legal right to do so, and for which we pay a substantial connection charge. Southern Water, as the incumbent water authority, is obliged to ensure capacity for all forthcoming developments and to use this payment towards any upgrades necessary. In this instance, we have contributed a £191,000 infrastructure charge towards these upgrade works. Aware of local concerns and in order to prevent the overloading of the network, we have applied for the foul water drainage connections in phases, always confirming the capacity with Southern Water in advance. We have once again sought this confirmation for our remaining 58 homes, and in response, Southern Water have confirmed in writing to Maidstone that capacity would be provided with works underway. Nevertheless, we are aware of the wider issues that have been spoken of and the flooding experienced along Marden Road. It would appear that these issues are historical in nature, largely as a result of the age and condition of the sewers and the unusual connection of the foul and surface water at this location. In response, we have chosen to implement a number of additional interim measures beyond those usually required under normal circumstances and at some considerable cost, including the installation of sensory equipment, the relaying of some of our existing drainage and diversion of foul to our on-site pumping station rather than connecting directly to the public sewer, and the installation of a temporary underground holding tank to provide additional storage at times when the public network surcharges. Alongside these, we have also provided 56 cubic metres of emergency storage within the development that ensures any release into the wider public network only happens at pre-agreed times of capacity. It's also worth noting that unlike the current situation in Marden Road, our development has separate surface water and foul sewers, with surface water directed to the north and away from Marden Road. As a result, our development does not contribute to the surcharge experience. Construction of Southern Water's improvement project began in March 21. This involves the installation of an oversized pipe that will temporarily hold the sewage until any peak flows have passed and levels have sufficiently reduced in the public sewer. These works are well underway, and we are advised that completion is expected by the end of November 21. This would coincide with our anticipated legal completion of our 192nd home. Despite the pandemic, we are committed to delivering new homes at Dickensgate and allowing our residents to move in on time and without any further delay. As outlined, we are reliant on Southern Water as the statutory undertaker to deliver the necessary capacity as planned, and they have confirmed in writing that this is the case. The matter before members this evening is whether the details of these are sufficient to allow the discharge.
Miss Dunn, I think you've had your 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, without more ado, I will go straight to the local member, Councillor Perry.
Make sure I've got the right pair of glasses on, sorry. Yes. At first glance, this appears to be quite simple and straightforward. Discharge a condition, which in this case is condition 18. But unfortunately, this proposal hides a multitude of sins. Marden Road has a long history of drainage problems involving foul and surface water dispersal, many of which have involved Southern Water, and quite frankly, we've been talking them for years and years and years of some of the problems that are in this area, and they have not exactly covered themselves in glory. Indeed, it was recognised years ago that the current system can no longer cope, which is why when the original outline planning permission for Dickensgate Estate was granted, it was based on the recommendation that the foul water would not be dispersed via the Marden Road. The recent heavy rainfalls, and this has been going on for some time, have highlighted the problem. And we had a meeting between our MP, Helen Grant, and the Chief Executive at the time of Southern Water, I don't know whether he's still the Chief Executive, which I and a representative from the Parish Council, who is also a drainage expert, attended. It was agreed that Southern Water would undertake a full review where all possible options and solutions would be considered, and there are various options and solutions. However, apart from some small email exchanges, we still seem to be waiting a full detailed report. And now, on reading the planning officer's report, Southern Water have put forward their solution without further explanation, in other words, a diktat. And we are now asked to approve the discharge of a condition which we know there are real problems in this area without any further information or explanation, which in my view goes against the whole spirit of what was originally agreed between our MP and the Chief Executive, and we were still been waiting for this report. It doesn't need me to remind you of the reputation of this statutory undertaker now has. It is rock bottom. This is the organisation that has polluted our county's coastline and severely damaged the reputation of our well-renowned Whitstable oysters. I'm not surprised that they've been publicly described as monstrous. And yet the residents of Staplehurst are asked to accept their decision without any further question. At a recent planning committee, which you may recall involved application to remove a hedge, the proposed solution was described as sticking plaster and a 19th century solution using 19th century technology. I do realise that officers are in a difficult position with this, and I accept that, since despite Southern Water's appalling reputation and record, they are still the statutory undertaker. Why the changes were made is open to speculation, but I suspect originally cost savings were probably in the equation, because, as I said, the original proposal was to have foul water disperse in a totally different direction and using a whole different area. Nevertheless, the position as it currently stands is not acceptable. So to try and resolve this, I would propose that we do actually defer this application. But I do this, and what I would say is this: I would ask that Southern Water do what they originally agreed to do, and that prepare a detailed report setting out all the possible options they have considered, which I think is reasonably fair for us to do, and present this to us, the planning committee, and I think the ward councillors and the county councillor also ought to be involved, and also, of course, the parish council, because the parish council have been very much involved in this all along as well. And I'm really pleased that Councillor Sharp has taken the trouble to come here tonight. So I think that's very important to hear the parish council's view. So that's what I would propose. And I will also, possibly, there's a further possibility that we might consider employing an independent drainage expert to try and review the whole Marden Road drainage area, because it's not just about the Dickens Gate estate, or that's obviously the trigger, the catalyst for this whole problem, but the whole area we know has been a problem for years and years and years, and has not been properly resolved. And this estate, sadly, I think, has been the trigger that's caused a lot of the issues in this particular area. But it's not just in this area. There are other areas of Staplehurst as well, which Southern Water has a responsibility for. So I will leave it there, but I do have that proposal. I would like to move that we defer this, subject to Southern Water providing us with more detailed information, a report that they were originally going to do, setting out their reasoning for their decision, because I think we should know that, because there are other options, and I think many people will consider better options, and they seem to have been set aside. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Do you have a seconder at this stage? In that case, Councillor English. Sorry, Councillor Young, I didn't see you. Do you wish to speak now?
Sorry, I'd like to second. Apart from the fact that I fully endorse everything that Councillor Perry has said with regard to this situation. I mean, obviously the sewage problem within Staplehurst has been going on for a very long time, and it seems strange to me that it's not been sorted out prior to this actual development taking place. And for this to be continued, I think for the residents, when they actually take up they actually move into these houses, and if they have problems with sewage, it'll all come back on us. Why didn't we sort it out at the planning stage? So I think his recommendation to get a full report with other options to resolve the problem is very, very valid. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Young. I think we find ourselves in an invidious situation here. Councillor English.
Right. I sympathise, and I've made that quite clear all the way through this process, and I don't think Southern Water have operated with any degree of honour or integrity. However, what's being asked for is rather beyond the scope of a normal deferral, in the first case, because we're effectively would be asking them to go away and come back with another application for something else. Not saying that that wouldn't be the best course of action, but I'm just saying that that is beyond the scope of deferral, because essentially that would be a completely different planning application, if you see. So I think if you want a different solution, then there has to be a refusal and a submission of something else. You can't. I don't think you can defer this because it's simply not because we want a better solution anyway. If there's a technical question about this application or a need for further information on this application, and that's perfectly reasonable to have a deferral. But if we want to defer it because we want something better instead, that is essentially another application. It's beyond the scope of a deferral, and I can't see how that will could possibly work within the timescales that we have. So if you could narrow down quite what you're looking for, Councillor Perry, in terms of your request, that would help. Otherwise, I think we're going to have to be hearing arguments for refusal if you want another application.
Thank you, Councillor. Shall I come to Councillor Cox, then I'll come back to James Bailey for some advice.
Thank you for doing it that way around, because I'd like Mr. Bailey to answer a question. If we delay, and that's what we're really doing, if we defer, and we have another recurrence of the amount of rain we've just had, that's slowing down the process, surely, of doing what the official body are saying they've worked out the actual way of making this better. And if we say they've got it wrong, are we then liable if something massive happens again and we get a massive flooding? I was sent pictures of the middle of Grove Green flooded. So surely where you've already got a problem, wouldn't it be better to get something going, something in there? And if that doesn't work, then it's their problem, not ours, because we've deferred it. I don't know. I'm not trying to be obtrusive. I'm trying to say, surely you've asked them to get on with something. This is what they've come up with. I'd let them make the bad decision, not us.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. I'm inclined to agree with you. This is entirely a Southern Water problem, and it's something for them to sort out. It's not our place to tell them what we think they should be doing. They are the experts. They are the statutory undertaker. But this is a very, very difficult situation, as Councillor Young said. If it all goes belly up, if it all goes seriously wrong, it's Maidstone Borough Council will get most of the flack. And we want to try and avoid that. We want to shift that onto Southern Water. Reeves?
Thank you, Chairman. Just a very quick one. I'm behind Councillor Perry and Councillor Young entirely in residents, and I think it's a real awful situation that they're going through. My only concern is that if we, whatever happens, if we defer it, there could be a major issue. I mean, no one expected that the other day. But also, if we refuse and bring another application in, I think there is a massive issue in terms of who is going to independently tell us that the new one's better than the one that's put before us, because I don't know. I don't think our officers know. And so the real quandary that we're in is that we're actually relying on Southern Water, who we don't want to trust at the moment, what's to say they're going to bring something back that's cheaper yet under, that they say is better. That's the issue that we've got at the moment. So I think we need to just put the whole liability on them and let them deal with anything that comes of what they propose.
I think that's what we need to do, but Mr. Bailey? Sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think if I could ask, if it's okay with you, if I could ask the case officer to address this first. I know Mr. Fitzpatrick also wanted to request, so maybe if we could deal with those parts. I just think what we need to look at in this instance, we can't mitigate an existing impact from this development. So this development needs to mitigate its own impact. We can't look at the wider circle on what's going on in terms of the sewage issue around Staplehurst. So I just wanted to focus on that. But I think if I could bring in the case officer first and then Mr. Fitzpatrick, and then if I could then mop up any issues that come on the back of that aren't picked up. So maybe if I could ask Mr. Timms to address that first.
Please do. Thank you, Mr. Bailey.
Thank you.
Mr. Timms, are you still there?
Yes, thank you. That was pretty much what I was going to say. I mean, we've got to be careful. The focus for this condition is the foul drainage for the Hen and Duckhurst site, of which we've already approved 192 houses, which is basically sort of pumping stations on site. As the applicant says, it's phased. This is the final part, and the applicant applies to Southern Water to connect to the public sewers, pays money, and then Southern Water comes up with a solution. Whether we like the solution or not, they are carrying out that solution as we speak. So the focus must be on the mitigation of this development, and whilst the problems we all know are very bad in the area, it cannot be to fix that. So a sort of deferral to ask Southern Water for justification, it's not really within the applicant's power. They just apply, and the statutory undertaker provides the upgrade. And again, the sort of drainage consultant to review the whole of Marden Road, it's just, you know, unfortunately, it's not relevant to this application. The only reason I think you could defer, which obviously we're not recommending, is to say you need more clarification that it's going to do the job. But the condition says details of foul sewerage disposal submitted to the local planning authority. The condition actually says in consultation with Southern Water. So they've done that. We've consulted Southern Water. They've told us what they're doing and that it's going to do the job, and they're actually doing it at the moment. So I mean, even if we defer or refuse, it's being carried out. You know, not a great position, I admit, but that's how it works. The statutory undertaker sort of gets on with providing the mitigation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Timmins. Do you wish to mop up, or do you want Mr. Fitzpatrick?
If I could ask Mr. Fitzpatrick, the legal officer, to comment. He wishes to come in, and then I'll address any point that people haven't addressed, if that's okay, Chairman.
Chair, Mr. Timms has already said what I was going to say. I mean, as I said, the foul drainage has already been approved for up to 192 houses so far. So I've got nothing further to add to what Richard has added.
I think the only thing I could say is what I said at the start, with Councillor Perry's request to look at the whole of the existing situation on Staplehurst. That wouldn't be a ground to defer this application. The only thing we could do is, members are asking in terms of the stat consultee. So we rely, unfortunately, on Southern Water as our stat consultee to provide that evidence. They have provided it to us. I suppose the only thing you could do is, we're not drainage experts, that if you weren't satisfied, as Mr. Timms already said, you could effectively question whether this has got longevity in it, whether this is correct. Once that information comes through, you'd have to get a private consultant to review that information to say that does that consultant agree with Southern Water? And you see that's the only route that you possibly could go down, but obviously there's a cost implication to that situation. But you couldn't ask the consultant to review the existing situation. That would be completely outside the terms of this condition discharge. You could only ask Southern Water for further clarification on those points that Mr. Timms said. And then if you still weren't satisfied, then you could employ a consultant to review that to see if the consultant agreed with what Southern Water's coming up as the recommendation. That's the only way you could really challenge it. And then it would have to come back to this committee to say, you know, if the consultant agrees, well, there's nowhere else we can go. If the consultant said there's a different solution. But does that get us anywhere? Because Southern Water could turn around and say, well, this is the solution that we prefer. So I don't necessarily know if that gets us any further forward. It leads to a protracted discussion on this point, but I feel I'm right that I have to point out and clarify those matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Can I come to Mr. Councillor Harwood and then back to Councillor Perry, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a few observations on this. All members of this committee practically will recall the advice we were given, and by both the statutory undertaker and indeed by officers, in relation to installing this septic tank, where we were told that there was no other approach than to tear out the ancient hedge. There was no other approach than to take out what is a very rare plant, true fox sedge, that grew in the field. We stuck to our guns, and they actually gave way, and all the time there was another route in. It just was a bit more trouble than ripping out the hedge and the true fox sedge in the meadow. So I think we need to be kind of stick to our guns to a certain extent. And I think where we need to do that, which I think really fits in with the parish council and the ward councillors' concerns, is around capacity. Because I think that is at the heart of all of the problems in Staplehurst, and we're seeing ever more intense precipitation events, so therefore surface water, we're seeing ever more development, so therefore wastewater, and it's coming together to end up in the streets and in the fields. And even the Highway Authority does not have sufficient capacity within its highways drainage infrastructure to cope with the current levels of rainfall. And I think that we really do need to ensure, and if we need to take independent advice to do so, I think we need to do it, because we need to understand what is the true capacity, building in some headroom for, basically a rate of climate change which is outstripping the calculations we're working on. And so I think that is a really important point, and I think that's where, I don't know where a deferral could come in, because it could give the time to get those consultants to tell us whether that volume is sufficient to cope with what's facing us. And just as a kind of a postscript to this, we approve an awful lot of housing, an awful lot of development, an awful lot of business developments all the time. And the elephant in the room is what happens to the wastewater off of those sites. There's a lot of talk about suds and rainfall and so on, but the reality is that wastewater, that sewage, is only going to go in one place, and that's a river or the sea. Frankly, they might strain some of the bits out, but that's what will happen to it. And there's been a lot of debate and concern about why, after some years of improvement with the decline of industry, the water quality in our streams and our rivers and our ponds and lakes and so on is declining. Well, they're absolutely integrally linked. So if we are going to sustain an environment we can live with and we are proud of, we need to ensure that privatised companies like Southern Water do actually deliver for the communities, and essentially they're in a bidding war. They go along to their kind of management meeting, and then they say, where do we really need to invest the money? And it's not about real calculated need. And I think we can almost call their bluff by getting an expert in to look at the calculated need, because this is more than just one rather large housing estate. This is about the Staplehurst and about the Weald of Ken. So I think I do support, in a slightly refined way, what Councillor Perry was suggesting, that we do need some impartial advice, because we're taking their word as gospel when we don't know it necessarily is.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. Councillor Perry and then Councillor Mumford.
I'm thankful. First of all, thank you, Councillor Harwood. You put it better than I did. I think you're absolutely right. I totally agree with everything you just said, actually. And it is about what is the true capacity, and it is a capacity issue. It's key to it. And it's not just Staplehurst. You're right, the whole area. I mean, the River Belt, for instance, flows within a quarter of a mile of where I live. And I know that is in serious danger. And yet it's a triple SI river, which needs to be very carefully protected. So, I mean, if we could defer something on the lines of the capacity, and I do support the idea of getting independent advice, then I think this would be very worthwhile, because it's not just Staplehurst at the end. In the end, it's the whole area, the whole Weald of Kent, and what we're developing in that Weald. So I do support what Councillor Harwood said. I thank him very much for his comments, actually. They're very well put.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Councillor Mumford and then Councillor English.
I think we might have lost our way. I'm not sure. It's probably me that's lost my way. Everyone keeps talking about Southern Water. Southern Water is not the applicant. I think the applicant is someone else. Now, if this was a drainage system, we'd say to that someone else, developer, prove your drainage system works, because I think that is the question here. Will it work? And we're focusing our attention on Southern Water. We should be saying to the developer, will this work, and prove it. And it should be him that gets the independent person, and they come to us with a report from an independent person, because they are the developer, they are the applicant, and shows us, will it work? So we defer until he does that, instead of focusing on Southern Water.
Can I ask Mr. Timms to come back first, and then I'll come back to you, Councillor English?
Thanks, Chair. I mean, I think Councillor Mumford put it right at the start. The applicant is Barratt Homes, it's not Southern Water, and we can't defer this to look at wider issues. You could only defer it to seek clarification. So, for example, you could say, someone said we're taking their word for it. So you could say, right, we want to know what the foul drainage flows from this site are above the 192 and what is the capacity that's being provided. So that would be volumes and figures. And then you've got surety that it can do the job. Now, that's the point at which can officers assess that? I mean, if it's simple maths, then yes, but that's where you might say we want an expert to review that. Because we can only ask the applicant to do things. So the applicant can't go away and review the whole system. They can just provide information, like Councillor Mumford said. In terms of the applicant paying for the independent person, you can ask, well, we can ask for that. They don't have to do it. Normally, the applicant provides information that's reviewed by the local planning authority. Usually we have a consultee to do that. We wouldn't have, well, we do in this case, but it's Southern Water. So that's something I don't think we could guarantee that the applicant pays the cost. But as I say, coming back to the point, it's foul drainage. It's not surface water drainage at all. It's foul drainage. You could only defer it to clarify what are the flows from the site and what's the capacity. And that's it. You can't go further beyond the wider system. It's not relevant to this application.
Thank you, Mr. Timms. Right, Councillor English.
Exactly. As I tried to say at the beginning, a deferral must be narrowly drawn. We can't go on a fishing expedition across the whole of the south of England looking at huge issues that are not related in any way to this application. If there's a need for a deferral on the narrowly drawn grounds that Mr. Timms referred to, then so be it, and I'm not against it, and maybe we should do that. But if we defer to look at the water and drainage problems in the whole of Staplehurst and Marden, the applicant will simply do what he should do, appeal for non-determination. I would, because that would be a lengthy process which would take months at the very least, and would be quite an unreasonable request from this committee, frankly. These issues predate this application, are not of the applicant's making. He's not responsible for the failings or otherwise of Southern Water or any other statutory undertaker, so why should that developer be held up by those failings? He will appeal and he will win for non-determination. If we want a deferral on the issues directly related to the capacity for this site, then so be it. We should defer for that.
Thank you, Councillor English.
Chair, sorry to interrupt. I think it's actually being carried out as well. That that's the thing we can't forget, that they're constructing it at the moment. It doesn't mean you have to approve it, but I think we mustn't forget that they're doing it. I think it's meant to be complete sort of by November, but we must remember that.
Thank you, Mr. Timms. Councillor Round.
Thank you, Chair. It may be going off at a tangent, but there's probably at least half of this committee that were probably sat here for the original application many moons ago. I vaguely remember that this subject came up at that time because this subject of water whatever it is, foul water, surface water, river water, water of every description, is a very sensitive subject in the Weald, because we've all got that sort of problem in all our wards across the area. But what I seem to remember is we did have a lot of discussion, and although it was the early days and the original application, did we not, Mr. Bailey, have some form of local consultation group set up for this application? Can you remember that? The reason why I ask is that, I mean, at least we could set up some meaningful dialogue between the key parties. Whatever decision we make tonight, because there are justifiable cases made both for and against whatever we decide, but at least we can have some established dialogue between the key players, and that established dialogue can actually be a bit more meaningful and lessen the scare.
Thank you, Councillor Round. We seem to be sort of falling into... Oh, Councillor Perry?
Look, we need to move this on. I realise that, and we need to live in the art of the possible. So I'm prepared to go along with what I think James Bailey and Richard Timms have kind of, not proposing, I know, but they're steering me. And for me, it's a very emotional subject. So I know exactly this whole area, and I know that although Councillor English is right in one sense, I know that this is a trigger point for a system that's broken already. But I don't want to go any further than that, because I think we need to resolve this tonight a little bit. And I would like to move that we do defer, but we're more specific with the deferral, and we ask these particular questions. I would personally like to employ at some point a consultant to look at this, because though surface water has been dismissed, there are strong indications that is an issue as well. But I don't want to go down that road tonight, because I think that's a whole different area and complicated area. So I would move to defer on the very specific issues. I think that Richard Timms, has particularly had the questions that Richard Timms has highlighted, and we could take it further from there. It would give us breathing space if we want to. If they come back, we could perhaps go down employing an independent consultant on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. So the deferment would have to relate entirely to the issues related to this application. It wouldn't be able to look at the sort of wider issues, which are obviously of great concern. Okay, well, we have that proposition put forward. It has been seconded. Sorry, Councillor Harwood.
Sorry, Chairman. I just think that we need to be quite clear about what we're asking officers to look at. And I think we need a really good second opinion on the calculation of the capacity for the tank. And that calculation needs to take into account what the maintenance regime will be going forward, because that's the problem. They fill up with grit and wet wipes and everything, and suddenly you've lost your capacity. And that's when the streets and the fields are full of sewage in Staplehurst and Marden and Headcorn and wherever else. So I think we really do need someone who really understands this system well, as to how easily this system can be cleaned, and whether its capacity is sufficient for the scale of wastewater that's going to find its way into those tanks. And to a certain extent, I share Councillor Berry's concerns that no matter when we're told that these are just for wastewater from property, surface water still does have a influence on their operation, because it's really funny that they discharge when it happens to be raining, in my experience. But but I think we need the expert opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. Mr. Bailey, would you like to come back on that to actually refine what we would actually be having to be asking for?
Yeah, I was just going to do, if Mr. Timms can listen carefully to this and then correct me if I have anything wrong. I just want to sort of capture what what members are asking here. So it's a deferment to seek clarification regarding flows from the site, the capacity of the tank, and to include future maintenance, for these to be provided by the applicant and for these to be reviewed. This seems to be the request from members, and for these to be reviewed by an independent consultant to check that these are acceptable. Mr. Timms, can you just respond on that? That's my understanding of what members requesting. Is that, in your view, a reasonable request from this committee?
Yeah, I agree with your summary, and I just think we have to bear in mind that this could be a couple of months or so until we come back, and obviously the work's ongoing, but obviously members know that, so yeah, I agree.
Thank you, Mr. Timms, and I think that's encapsulates, members, what you're seeking to achieve.
Thank you, Mr. Timms, and thank you, Mr. Bailey. Okay, well, you now have a proposition that's been seconded and has been clarified by Mr. Bailey and by Mr. Timms. Can I please have votes in favour of going along with the deferment?
It's 11, Chairman.
And votes against? And any abstentions? 2. Thank you very much, Councillor. That was a rather long and arduous debate. Would you like a 10-minute comfort break before we move on? Come back here by 15:15? No? Yes? Yes or no? Yes. Be back by 15:15. I know the clock's not working. We ready to reconvene, members, please? Right, thank you, members. Item number 14 on the agenda, Coles Farm, Dean Street, East Farley. Does any member wish to speak against the recommendation? You do. Sorry.
I don't. I wanted some clarity on things, but I don't think that needs to be done in committee. I will write to the case officer just to seek some clarification around some of the SUDs and landscaping things where it's not exactly clear through the papers and the submitted plans. But I can do that outside this meeting. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Councillor Holwood. Does anybody else want to speak against the motion? In that case, I'm quite prepared to propose from the chair that we accept the recommendation as per the papers. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. And votes in favour? And any votes against? Oh. Abstentions? Thank you, members, and thank you, Ms. Geary, for standing by. And I think
that's a short presentation again, isn't it?
you need to be mentioned in dispatches. I think that's devotion above the call of duty. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, members. Bye.
Thank you, members, and thank you, Ms. Geary, for being there. Thank you. Right, we now rush on to item, where are we, 16, is it? Item 16, which is the Lock Meadow Leisure Complex, and I'll ask Austin Mackey if he can introduce the report, please. Sorry, what is that? Councillor Coates. Sorry, the report needs to be introduced by the officers first, Councillor Coates. And then, okay, so we'll ask Mr. Mackey, please, if he will introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As this is a council application, unfortunately, you do have to listen to me presenting the scheme, but I will be brief. This application was deferred at the previous committee on two grounds. Firstly, members sought clarity as to how this element of the improvement works fitted into the wider Lock Meadow plans. You also requested an improved landscaping scheme to soften the visual impacts and for details of the potential biodiversity net gain. Just to explain the background to and the support for the overall enhancement of the Lock Meadow complex, obviously policies SP1 and 4 of the local plan seek to widen the town centre's leisure offer. The strategic plan seeks to create a more sustainable leisure offer, and this site is clearly very well located in terms of access to a wide range of bus and rail services. And the recently published draft economic development strategy in the section headed Destination Maidstone seeks to create a thriving cultural and diverse leisure offer. So there is quite clearly a strong policy framework to support enhancement to the leisure offer on the site. In terms of the capital programme, since the council acquired its interest in the site, we've obtained new leisure operators. We've recently revamped the food offer. We have upgraded the building fabric in terms of its character and appearance. We've introduced planting to the front of the site. There are proposals for an enhanced play area and town square to the rear of the site adjacent to this proposal. I included in the appendix to the committee report The brochure that was the subject of recent public consultation for the play area, you probably can't read the words, but they explain that the council is looking at theming the play area so that there is a strong relationship to nature and biodiversity. So in a way there is an educational element to that, as well as a recreational element. This plan shows the wider site. You can see the overall boundaries here. The green area is the enhanced play zone. The yellow area is the area that we refer to as the town square. This is more a proposal than an existing element, and the red shows the approximate position of the proposed seating extension. So the current proposal does form part of an integrated package for the wider site, where it is planned that there will be a significant enhancement to the family-orientated leisure offer for the site. This offer relies to a great extent on its uniqueness in terms of the riverside setting, and it's important to officers that the relationship of the outdoor seating to the river isn't lost, and that's one of the reasons why we haven't proposed what I would call intervening screening along the river embankment, because we want to keep that functional and visual relationship there. Just to remind members, this is the existing terrace. The proposed extension would bring the terrace out towards the camera view. You can see that the terrace sits against the large mass of the existing building and therefore would not materially impact on longer distance views towards the site. In the foreground here is part of the sort of former parking area that is planned to become a town square. The objectives for this area to have an event space, a function space, concert space, that will again link to the extended decking area and to the play area. The council haven't finalised the details for this scheme yet, and therefore we don't want to introduce landscaping into this area that would prejudice those future plans. The leisure team do propose, however, that we would introduce 4 large planters into this space, which can at a later date then be incorporated into the future landscaping scheme. So whilst we wouldn't encourage trees in planters as a permanent feature, we're confident that the planters will be of such a scale and the tree species of a survivability rate that when the main town square scheme is finalised, those trees can then be transposed into the ground in the final landscaping scheme. So there's no wastage or ineffectiveness. Members asked that the planting scheme for the proposed deck be enhanced, and it's therefore proposed that additional planting will take place on both the rear elevation and the side elevation. Zooming in, you can see that in addition to the main square planters, there will be planters on both the deck and the front of the deck, and the introduction of climbing plants onto the facing wall of the extended deck. There are some gaps where ventilation has to take place, and a similar extension of landscaping around. So, you know, these are relatively modest in scale planters that follow the design of those at the front. The introduction of climbers, we feel that will provide some biodiversity enhancement. These will obviously be of a scale that is appropriate to this area, but officers consider that having regard to the existing appearance of the existing deck, you know, compared to what is existing, the scheme as proposed will provide significant enhancement opportunities. So to conclude, Chair, to relate to members, this proposal is part of an integrated family-orientated leisure offer. It relates to the wider proposals to integrate food, entertainment and play/education. We want to maintain the relationship to the Medway, but we think we can do that without adversely affecting views towards the site. Following the deferral, the leisure team have brought forward improved landscaping schemes. They do want to retain flexibility until the town square design is finally developed, but we feel that the interim solution is adequate. And of course, whilst the benefits of the current proposals have a relatively limited biodiversity net gain offer in themselves, they are part of a significant wider package of measures across the site as a whole, including those that were previously approved when you approved the elevational enhancements, and those that will come forward as part of the enhanced play area and the future town square. So on that basis, Chair, we feel that the leisure team have responded positively to the deferral. I know the leisure manager has spoken to a number of members on this matter, and subject to the amended conditions in the updated report, we recommend that permission be granted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mackey. We have no members of the public here or visiting members, but before opening the discussion up to the floor, I'd like to report that both Councillor Perry and myself received an email from the ward member, Councillor Harper, who was very much supporting this scheme. I don't know if that can be recorded, if it's appropriate for that to be recorded in the minutes. But I have you, Councillor English, but Councillor Coates first. You're the ward member for Fant, or one of them.
Yeah, thank you very much. I won't keep you very long, but can I read out my notes? Is that allowed? As I'm a new...
Yes, you can say whatever you want to,
okay.
yes.
Right. Councillor Coates and Councillor Margaret Rose visited the site with Alexa Kirsten Wood on the 13th of July 2021. We met with Eric Pye, who's the site manager for the form fit out. Speaking to him, I learnt that they need the site needs to attract a different clientele to the food hall by 14th of October this year. The outside terrace is a landscape to be landscaped to enhance appearance, as we've seen. There's a child play area, nature landscape theme, a natural play area. The town square area is a flexible space, and as we've seen with planters, to my knowledge, the cost is an upgrade of about £900,000. The council has a lease of 105 years from 2019 of £19 million. Report summary: development causes no harm and permission is therefore recommended. Both Councillors Coates and Rose agree that the project is an asset to this part of the town and for Maidstone as a whole, and I'm happy that Councillor Harper agrees with that.
Thank you, Councillor Coates. Thank you. Councillor English. Councillor Cox.
I was trying to come in earlier, Mr. Chairman, because clearly there's an issue here. Clearly, I hate to say this, but clearly Councillor Coates has discussed this application in advance with his ward colleagues and has come to a predetermined decision. I cannot, in all conscience, sit here and allow him to vote. He's clearly come to a decision before on this application before he came to this meeting.
Thank you, Councillor English. Is Mr. Fitzpatrick still with us?
If we could just bear 1 minute, members will get Mr. Fitzpatrick to address that, because that is a legal matter that
Yep.
Councillor English has raised, which we need the legal view on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. I must confess I didn't quite hear exactly the first opening statements of what Councillor Coates said. Yes. Can we, that was you. Okay.
I do have a substantive contribution to make. This is actually, it actually affects my ward rather more than it does Councillor Coates. Not that there's any problem with that, because the immediate neighbours would actually be the residents in College Avenue, which include the chief executive of this council, but that's neither here nor there, and a number of other people. I actually do support the application. I think the deferral was sensible to seek further information and clarification. Councillor Harwood and others may have points of detail, but in general we need to do this and to actually improve the leisure offer for the town. Don't disagree with anything that was been said by Councillor Coates, but we need to make sure that people come to this committee with an open mind, ready to be persuaded by the arguments. They can't come with a pre-written statement that's been agreed with someone else before they come here. In support or against an application. We just can't have that. I stopped Councillor Atkinson when he did the same thing a couple of years ago. So we need to be consistent about that. But I do think we should move ahead with this application, and therefore I move the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor English. Councillor, I think it was Councillor Cox and then Brindle and then Perry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy when I indicated after Councillor English has proceeded to propose. I had indicated before, but I'm happy to second. Can I just say that I'm glad this has come back and we can now see some of the detail, which I believe was definitely there when I previously had seen it in another role. Can I also commend the play area? The images we're seeing here are certainly, we're reaching further than just a pirate ship that we might find somewhere just near to a river. So I think the challenge was certainly set, find something that was a bit different, and certainly what we're being shown here is a little bit more intuitive for the children that are going to use it, and I'm sure many of the adults will wonder what on earth a huge squirrel is doing right near the Medway, but I'm sure it's absolutely great, so I'm happy to now second this.
Thank you very much
for the officers doing the work.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cox. I now understand we have Mr. Fitzpatrick on the line, and hopefully he can provide us with some legal advice. Mr. Fitzpatrick, are you there? Well, let's... Yeah.
I can hear. I can hear now. Sorry, I don't know what's happened there.
Hello, Mr. Fitzpatrick. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can now.
Okay, did you hear the statement? I didn't hear it in its entirety by Councillor Coates.
No, I got cut off partway through that.
Okay, because it is my recollection that Mr. Coates read out a statement in which he had said he had visited the site of the Lock Meadow extension together with Councillor Rose, and they had at that meeting decided how they would like this application to be determined. And a suggestion has been made that that is predetermination and that Councillor Coates should be prohibited from voting on this particular application.
I agree.
I don't know whether you're able to follow that, Councillor Coates. It's one of the basic principles of this committee that we all have to attend these meetings with an open mind. And if you come along and you say you've discussed the matter with somebody else and agreed something, that immediately excludes you from being able to speak or vote on that motion. It is something that we all have to learn, and we all go through it. We all have to do our planning training. So on this particular instance, you won't not be allowed to vote on this application, but I'm sure, well, I'm not wishing to predetermine it now. We haven't seen what the show of hands will be, but we will have a show of hands. The motion has been proposed and seconded, and can I please have votes in favour?
That's 12, Chairman.
Any against? Abstentions? Right, well, you can see, Mr. Coates, that the application has been approved. And, you know, please, you know, this is how we have to operate, and we all have to learn. Mr. Bailey.
Yeah, Mr. Coates, Councillor Coates, we have got our planning training agreed now, and the planning training on the 1st of September will deal with predetermination and the impacts of JR, which will be delivered by our legal officers. So, as I said, we've set the training dates for September to cover the August holiday period, but as I said, there's 2 dates set, the 1st and the 9th, that will deal with the predetermination and the JR issue, so you'll get full training on that matter. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Right, we now move on to item, I think it's 17, which is the appeal decisions, where we've got a 75% success rate and a disappointing result in Staplehurst, which I know the former chairman considered Staplehurst the centre of the universe, but there we are. Right, I'm sure you'll agree, Mr. Perry, Councillor Perry.
Yes, I certainly do. I just wanted to put on record how disappointed we were with this decision, certainly in Staplehurst. It's a terrible decision, in my view. I'll be perfectly honest. I would like the minutes to reflect what I feel about it. It's right in the middle of our conservation area. It's between 2 really very important listed buildings. We don't need it. And what I didn't like when I read the inspector's report, it seemed to ignore the position. We've got a Cheshire home just down the road. People use that pavement with wheelchairs, and they seem to dismiss that as, okay, it may not be a planning reason, I accept that, but describing the way it was done was deeply disappointing, and I don't really know what more to say, but I'd just like to put it on record that we are very, very disappointed with this. I am going to raise it with Helen Grant because we've had a number of issues with the inspectorate, and this is just one more that I feel they just got it very, very badly wrong. There's not a lot we can do about it, apart from very expensive legal proceedings, which I don't think we can afford to do. So I just wanted to say that. But this is no criticism of James and his team. I know they do their very best with all these. So, but it's, you know, it's just happened. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Mr. Bailey, do you wish to comment or come back on anything of those?
Just
cases?
one point that I was going to say on that particular appeal. Just to let you know, we are writing to the inspectorate because within that decision notice, you would have noticed that they said that we didn't. The inspector said we didn't have a 5-year supply. which is, I don't know where that came from, because that wasn't a discussion point in that appeal. So I have asked the team leader to, there is a specific element in the Planning Compensation Act that allows us to go formally write to the inspector and say, you've made an error here, will you correct that decision? Now, that's not meaning we're going down a JR process, because we don't consider there's sufficient legal issues to go down that route, but we are going down to correct the 5-year, asking the inspector to correct, or whether we will correct the 5-year mistake that they made, because they didn't ask us for information. So I don't know where that's come from. It's very erroneous. So I can update members what comes on the back of that. But knowing the inspectorate, it will be quite some time. They normally take months and months, unfortunately, to respond to us. But it is an important point, because from a policy point of view, we can't have an appeal decision saying we haven't got a 5-year supply, when clearly we have, and our evidence demonstrates that we have. So we are going back on that point.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. That's something that is quite... So, Councillor Harwood.
Yeah, on the same tack, when the South Cottage application came in, there weren't a lot of the design approaches that we usually seek on the initial application, but the proposed conditions from officers were looking to impose them. And I just wonder whether in any kind of common statement of common ground or discussion, or subsequently now, where there is a determination, whether there is any opportunity for us to ensure that the thing is sustainable and well landscaped, and all of those considerations we normally have, because it was very low on detail in terms of things like the materials, things like the landscape treatment, things like the sustainability. And I just wonder whether, even though we may have lost the appeal, we still do have some opportunity to discuss with the applicants some of the finer detail of the scheme to make it fit into the conservation area and actually be a sustainable development in line with the Mppf.
Well, one would hope they would seek advice during details, but Mr. Bailey.
Well, they certainly have condition requirements. I mean, if members would like me to send round on the back of the Mppf link, I could send round the decision so you can have a look at it, but they will be required to submit sub-conditions on the condition discharges, where we will be able to exert influence on that basis.
Thank you. Right, any other comments on the appeals? In that case, I'll draw the meeting to a conclusion. Thank you very much, members, and see you in 3 weeks' time.